Welcome, everybody. David here, bonus episode of Left Reckoning, and joined by my good friend and brother, Matt Leck. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, David. Good to be with you on this great Sunday. We're gonna have a fresh one.
A beautiful Sunday. It's a what?
Well, it's hot where you are. It's been perfect ever since that apocalyptic. What do they call it? The smoke haze we have. I forget the movie reference everyone was making, but Blade Runner. It's been just like 70 degrees and sunny, so I'm not sweating like you are.
Yeah, it's all good though. I got Barton Springs and Deep Eddy to jump into later. So, but before we get to that, we got some fun stories. We're gonna be hanging out, a little bit of a catch up episode. We're going to talk about the Teamsters in a little bit because there's some really positive and exciting news, which sometimes feels like too much of a rarity on Left Reckoning to be able to talk about something good. And then we're going to be taking a visit up north to Minnesota. But before we get there, I wanted to go through this clip with you, Matt. As everyone knows, I'm a huge country music fan, particularly outlaw country. I'm a huge fan of Chris Christopherson, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Johnny Cash, of course. But there was this clip that had sort of gone viral, and I don't know if you had seen it, Matt, of them talking about America and sort of some of the problems with this country. And it went a little viral online, and I wanted to play a little clip from this interview because I do think that, it's important to sort of reclaim that history because there's something really awful, I think, happened in country music. I think, frankly, in a lot of music, but after 9/11, it became really conservative. And that was really never the case. And like Johnny Cash, like all these people that everyone knows and loves, like you forget that they always sort of had to go up against the big record labels that were trying to make them say certain things. And the reason they're so famous is because they refused to, not just politically, but, musically as well. Willie for years was sort of a backup artist in Nashville and, wasn't making the music that you would sort of recognize as Willie Nelson sound. And I think that there's something about like that kind of creative freedom that certainly leads to political freedom. And anyways, it's a breath of fresh air versus some of the stupid stuff that you hear and listen to today. But yeah, anyways, let's play it and, sort of talk about it a little bit.
Wrong with the United States of America at the moment? If it's ill, if it is sick, if anything is ailing it, what do you think it might be?
There's a lot of things wrong with this country. I think the spirit is still here. The spirit just needs to scream a little bit. They say the wheel that does the squeaking is the one that gets the grease, so it's time for the spirit to scream a little bit.
Well, other than the fact that it reminds me a lot of the flag waving and choreographed patriotism that we had back in Nazi Germany half a century ago. The fact that we got a one-party system which is in control of all three branches of our government, lapdog media that's cranking out propaganda for the administration and make a Nazi blush. Other than that, we're doing pretty good.
If you ask me, one of the illnesses is that there's too much money being spent on military, and there should be more spent on education, welfare, young people, the children, the elderly, especially the elderly. There's always been a lot of things wrong with the country, but it's always been our obligation and opportunity to help straighten those things out. I love this country. I love America, for instance. I love this country.
Can I go to each of you in turn?
Okay, and then we'll come back. The second bit is a little bit more for me. But like Matt, I don't know. Like, you haven't seen that before? I don't know how familiar you are with like Chris Christopherson.
No, I'm suspicious. I mean, this isn't Griscom AI. You didn't create these. You didn't create these personalities yourself. With like, this is what I think they would say if we could recreate them. This is actual footage from the time.
Yeah, 1991.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure, and like. Look, no, I didn't create them. These are the guys I learned so much from, really. These people were huge inspirations on me and, I think both like in my life, but, certainly when it comes to politics. And like, if you go through it and like, maybe it'd be a fun episode if people want to, like, I used to do this thing with Ben on his show on GTAA, right when Ben first launched his show, where I'd take one of these guys like Chris or Johnny or Willie and a whole host of other country musicians, and sort of like, told their stories and investigated them, from both like just musically and what sounds good and is fun to listen to, but also like, trying to reclaim these figures because, I mean, everyone knows the joke that it's hilarious when people have that bumper sticker that says, like outlaw country, and then they have the thin blue line flag right next to it. But I mean, like Chris Christopherson in particular was like quite the radical. And he has had a military background as well. So he was somebody who was like very capable of speaking about these things. And it's also like very funny to hear somebody saying that back in 1991 about how basically we have one party government in America. And at that moment, especially, I mean, like, this is the beginning of like, the door opening up for Bill Clinton, which effectively was like this fusion of the Republican and the Democratic Party,
Right.
at least materially in a lot of ways. Well, Johnny Cash himself too, like, he grew up on a New Deal project. Public housing, farm housing that was built during the New Deal, right? So he like is a product of a lot of these, of like some better histories in America when it comes to doing social services for people.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, like we can't play these things because we get in trouble, but like. Chris Christopherson
Was Christopherson
really
sorry?
awesome...
Was he the one who said that was making the Nazi comment?
Yes, that's Chris Christopherson.
Right, okay.
Yeah. He has like songs about the Sandinistas that he wrote during the revolution. He got himself into a lot of trouble, and there's a very famous story about Willie and Chris Christopherson and oh Lord, what's his name? I'll put a boot up your ass. It's the American way.
Toby Keith.
Toby Keith, thank you.
Yeah.
At a party where basically like Chris Christopherson tries to fight Toby Keith because he finds his music so disgusting. And like, no, I think that, which is so awesome.
That is awesome.
And Willie's just there, like he like I think generally agrees with Chris, but he's very like, let's not
Right.
fight and like cause trouble at this party.
Willie like sets the table behind him, and Christopherson pushes him over.
But I mean, Willie's has always been a huge supporter of the SEIU in particular, of Native American rights. I mean, the cops, particularly in like Boston, used to protest outside of Willie's concerts because he supported freedom for Leonard Peltier, who's still a political prisoner in this country. And like, there's just like, I mean, like, so much of the project of Left Reckoning is like trying to reclaim like our history and things like that. And like, I think that also goes, for music as well. Like Merle Haggard's another guy who like, some of his lyrics, people are like, oh, he's a super conservative or whatever. But like Merle Haggard was one of the prisoners when Johnny Cash did his famous prison concert. Merle Haggard was a prisoner there, and he spent the rest of his life fighting for prisoners' rights, particularly in, I believe, Arkansas. They found a mass grave at one of these prison facilities there. And Merle Haggard, who, obviously was a huge name at that time, like put a lot of effort into making sure people knew about that, because these prison wardens were able to get away with these human rights abuses, because, it's on the back page of the newspaper if it ever comes out at all. And like, I think there's something that's really, I think cynically well done by the right has been to sort of appropriate, these figures and like music and a lot of culture in general, that was specifically like challenging the state, challenging the police, and fighting for working people. Where like, a lot of country music now, like it's like a celebration of working people in a really like watered down sense, in the sense of like, I work hard and other people don't, versus, some of the stuff that you got in the 70s and 80s, where it's like, yeah, we work harder than the rich and, the people who are exploiting us, taking advantage of us. And I think it's important not to sort of give those victories away, especially because, in my opinion, the music's very good as well.
Yeah, and like, on top of not being good for people's material outcomes, it's just like a worse art to be like, hey, like the problem is you aren't working as hard as me for the boss. Like, that sucks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we talk about the Teamsters, we're going to get into a little bit of that ideology. But, just since we're having fun here, I'm going to play the second half of this, and this is less um, political, but just fun to listen to them talking about their favorite song of all time.
With the United States of America at the moment. Can I go to each of you in turn just to finish this? The best country song you think was ever written? Chris Christopherson, can we start with you? What do you think is the best country song?
Maybe Big River. I've often thought that may be the best song, country otherwise.
Can you do a couple of bars of that for me, would you mind?
I met her accidentally in St. Paul, Minnesota, and she tore me up every time I heard that drawl, southern drawl. Then I heard my dream move back downstream, cavorting in Davenport, and I followed you, Big River, when you called.
What about you, Johnny
Took me
Cash?
2 seconds.
Well, I'm overwhelmed because I wrote that song. The best song that I think was ever written, I don't know, I think probably country song. I love you because.
Want to give
That's
me
a
the
good
first
one.
verse of that, please, Johnny?
I love you because you understand, dear, every single thing I try to do. You're always there to lend a helping hand, dear. But most of all, I love you because you're you. Leon Payne wrote that.
Yes, Jim Reeves hit, and then we go to Waylon Jennings. What do you think, Waylon?
One of the best
That's
songs I
my
ever
pick.
heard, and
By the way,
several people recorded. I recorded it, but that had nothing to do with it. It just says something I think is really great, and that's called "Dreaming My Dreams." And it says, no matter how bad things have been, like when it's in a relationship of any kind, you should come out of it, with no bitterness. And go ahead with your life, And you're not supposed to hate anybody if you ever loved them. I don't think you can.
And Willie Nelson.
I think the best song I've ever heard, especially country song, is "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry," Hank Williams
yeah,
song.
that's the go-to.
One
Yeah, it's a
verse in
good song.
particular, I think, is the greatest lines that I've ever heard. It's "The silence of a falling star lights up a purple sky, and as I wonder where you are, I'm so lonesome I could cry."
All right, we have to. Cut
I knew
it there
that one.
before we get-
I was worried I was gonna get shut out. I'm gonna check out that Johnny Cash one, but I knew I'm so lonesome. I haven't listened in a while, but I definitely know
Hank
that
Williams is like, and Hank Williams was a radical in his own way too, and anyways, it's like these are like a lot of our stories, and like the Highwaymen too, like a lot of their music was really uplifting. For example, of like the Native American struggle in this country in a way that like I think is really important, particularly for people who sort of brand themselves as like Western guys and things like that. They play free concerts and reservations all the time, particularly Waylon Jennings too. I think out of all of them, probably is the least political. But yeah, I mean, it's some good stuff. And if people want more on that, maybe we could do some special episodes. I've been wanting to get some of these younger people who are making really good outlaw country now, who like because of the internet. I think there's like one good thing that's come out of it is that like you can actually build something outside of like the record label kind of stranglehold you have on music. And there's a lot of really great people right now out there who I think maybe we should try to see if we can get them on the program to talk about it. But last suggestion before we move on, if you haven't heard it before, people should definitely listen to Willie Nelson and Ray Charles singing Seven Spanish Angels. It's probably one of the like most incredible live performances you'll see out there. But anyways, enough on country. Let's get to some of the nuts and bolts here. Let's talk a little bit about the Teamsters, Matt, if you're up for it.
Let's do it.
So, I mean, we want to give people an update. We're aiming to maybe get one of the organizers, some of the people who are working on the actual contract negotiations on the program soon. But it's been a pretty exciting week for Teamsters and I think for working class people in this country as a whole when it comes to some of the successes that we've seen. First up, huge victory in the contract negotiations. Remember, UPS, the contract expires on August 1st. amongst a whole host of issues, things like two-tier contracts, pay in general, has been air conditioning for workers, which is a life and death issue, literally. Unfortunately, there have been hundreds of deaths of UPS workers from heat exhaustion. And as if people watch the Griscom stream this Thursday, we were talking about some of the attempts by the right here in Texas to get rid of protections for workers when it comes to being outside in the heat. As the planet is warming and weather is getting more extreme, I mean, these fights are critical and quite life and death. One of the major demands for these workers has been like they need air conditioning in their trucks. It's 102 degrees here right now. I couldn't imagine how difficult it is, to be working outside, or driving around, in a truck all day, without any kind of respite from the heat. So this has been a fundamental demand. And remember that the company has plenty of money. They have plenty of money, and that's why these demands are being made right now. UPS is, having banner year after banner year. And for a while, they were refusing to put AC in these trucks. But you know what they did put in, Matt? Surveillance.
Some sort of surveillance. Yeah. Okay. I was going to say some sort of tracking. Yeah.
So no money to make sure you live, but plenty of money so that the boss can sort of track your every movement and activity while you're at work. Right. And it just goes to show, I think, the way that, a lot of new technologies are sort of being utilized to be punitive and punish workers instead of help them out. I mean, AC is an old technology. It's nothing new. But this has been a real rallying cry for UPS workers, and as of now, it is in the master agreement. So the master agreement has not been sort of finalized or settled yet, but a lot of these demands are being, are opening up for these workers, which is something that's really exciting, a testament to the new leadership at the Teamsters, a more militant approach. But no doubt about it that this wouldn't happen if it didn't coincide with this news right here. Which is that as people know, this month, the Teamsters have been holding their votes on whether or not to authorize a strike if a contract is not met by August 1st. And 97% from the National Teamsters authorize a strike. Similar results throughout the Teamsters organization. Overwhelming majorities are supporting going on strike if this contract is not met. And this is the power of the strike, that even the credible threat of it, can be so mobilizing, to these companies, because they don't want to be on the other side of it. I mean, there are around 350,000 UPS workers covered by the Teamsters. I think something like a quarter of all mail goes through UPS in this country. So something like that would be devastating not only to UPS, but would be, crippling to the U.S. economy in general. And this is just a night and day example of the difference here for the UPS workers versus the railroad workers, right? Because the railroad workers have the same kind of capability of shutting shit down, but they have that kind of parachute from the Biden administration and the government to make that threat of a strike have less teeth, which is why the railroad companies have never really bargained in good faith, because they know they're always going to be bailed out by the government. UPS doesn't have that. So you see them being sort of forced to the table here in a way that I think is really beneficial. So it's not settled yet whether or not the master agreement will be agreed upon. There's still more things to fight for in it, and then they have to sort of take it back to the membership. But just tremendous success this week when it comes to negotiation. And, this is one of the reasons that we've supported these more democratic shifts within the union, because look, it's getting the goods.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting dynamics. And, for my part, this is where the action is. And all of those presidential primary stuff is interesting to the extent that they can augment and supplement this with their efforts and this sort of activity. And that's why I think Cornell, when he talks about a movement, I might be jaded, but I would love to see something like that happen that's specifically along these sorts of lines. And I mean, we'll talk with people closer to the issue, but to me it's interesting to see how unions act in this way. We got the writer strike going on, and we've had all the Starbucks stuff and the Amazon as public support is, we've talked about, different than it was for me when I was learning unions were a good thing 15 years ago. I had to do that through like abstract work and like disregard what like Matt Iglesias was saying in the Washington Post. Now there's like a culture, at least, where there's not like, we don't have the actual material base, but at least people are there. And it's like, and I was talking with my buddy Chris about union stuff, and it's like the one area where we're told, in like, especially talking to kids, because he's a teacher now, you talk to kids, peer pressure's bad, but it's not bad when it comes to this stuff. And like, we need to really get this stuff moving. And you know, like, if unions, like this sort of air conditioning stuff, like it's this interesting moment. I'd be curious to see how the dynamics are, where these sort of the things that were goals, you sort of get to them, and then you have this other sort of wind behind your back that I don't think the U.S. labor movement's used to having. And what does that mean? And can it be significant? Yeah, you know, it's interesting.
I think this is really massive. And again, I think we'll do more, and hopefully be able to talk to some more people on the ground. But there are two issues that sort of have bubbled up around this.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if we want to like really get into the degrowth or freaks thing, but all I'll say is this: is that when you're seeing one of the most major unions fighting for the right to have air conditioning, and your big pitch is this bizarre anti-AC thing that we get from some of these degrowth folks. I don't even want to get into it too much, but a podcast recently called out some of us and our friends for supporting radically dangerous ideas like air conditioning for people, not just workers. But remember, you know, in Portland, Oregon, unfortunately, a lot of people died in their most recent heat wave. You know, and these things become life and death for people to be able to have a livable place. You know, if you're in an area, particularly when your houses aren't built to withstand 100-degree heat. I mean, old people literally cook to death in their homes. And, you know, taking this kind of ultra bizarre position against, for example, air conditioning, I find to be so tone deaf and out of step with the labor movement, or even just like the general needs of society right now. You know, like obviously, like a big part of the Green New Deal will be weatherizing people's homes so that like they aren't as affected by these things, you know, but that also can go along with utilizing technologies like air conditioning to make places comfortable and livable for working people. And, you know, the commitment of a certain group of like degrowther and, you know, let's call them green, like leftists, to instead of figuring out how to deal with, for example, like energy production to be able to fuel those systems and do that in a clean and renewable way, they just, you know, are sort of saying, oh, let's drop a lot of these technologies that can be very beneficial for people and for society, be they air conditioning or things like washing machines at home. You know, like, you know, not to be too like much of a good socialist feminist on this, but Lord, when you think about the amount of household labor that has been able to be automated for people utilizing those technologies, and you just want to eradicate that whole cloth, because you don't have enough of a vision to sort of figure out a way to do these things in ways that, you know, are more renewable and clean, etc. You know, you're throwing a lot of people under the bus, be it workers, be it, you know, people who do household labor. And there's just something that's just so out of step, I think, with the demands and needs of people than these kind of claims.
Yeah, well, you're not a technocrat. Like, that's what this is. This is the whole thing of like the problem with that whole degrowth mindset is, okay, if you think you have the proper you know, formula to get into power and to tinker with exactly how much workers need to sweat in order to get the environment under control, you know what? Don't look for me to be cheering you on. You don't need, you've already decided you don't need us. Yeah. So go do it, right? Like, to me, it's just like, it's the process, really. Like, okay, if Davos is like, we need to do this, we need this sort of funding for air conditioning. Yeah, fuck you. I don't give a fuck. Like, now's not the time for air conditioning. All that shit's bullshit. When workers decide, actually, we need this to do our jobs, then they get it. And like, and the whole thing of like, I don't really even understand like the economics of it, because to me, it's like, you just expect that to continue on as the climate gets worse and shit gets delivered more and more. It's psychotic to me. How on earth? Okay, charge more. All right, like I don't know what the fuck you want. Like that, it's an insane thing to sort of like. Well, on the one hand, there's no on the other hand. You take both hands and you take what the workers asked for and you give it to them.
Yeah, I think that's right. But don't forget, Matt, that as we've been told by multiple degrowthers, those UPS workers who are sweating and in extreme circumstances dying are actually participating in the exploitation of the global South and of women and queers and black people, to quote a very prominent degrowther we featured on this show.
I mean, we gotta start giving them medals from the executive and the
I'm sorry,
branch.
like it's too Christian at this point. Like the point is that to like deal with the climate crisis, we have to accept the level of suffering. And like there's so much of that ideology behind it. And then basically instead of trying to figure out, maybe a more Matt Huber style program where we're working with unions, to fight and reorient our economy toward a greener and a cleaner one. Instead of doing that, it's like we just need to reorient people's minds so that when they're suffering, they think that suffering, is providing some kind of global benefit, which is just, I'm sorry, you're retreating from the problem with that mentality, right? It's a retreat. It's extremely pessimistic as a philosophy, something that I find to be out of step with socialism in general.
Yeah.
But unless you had anything else you want.
No. Is there anything more?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about another freak, Matt, for a second. And this is just like, usually we try not to let random people sort of step in to be, the mouthpieces of entire ideologies. But this one's big enough. There was this tweet that a lot of people rightfully were condemning the other day from this person monitoring bias. They have a significant amount of followers. Very classic, like logic guy,
Bro, the bias.
Do you know them?
The obsession with bias is no, I don't. But that's such a funny name. Like, ooh, you're biased. Like, yeah. Motherfucker.
100%. Everyone is just too ideological, and what we need is data-driven solutions.
Wow, just reading this: independent and data-driven monitoring and hyperpartisan thinking, blank slatism, culture and culture wars. Yeah, I don't like this.
Yeah, reactionary, dumbass stuff. But I want to highlight this because this is such a hurdle that I think we have in this country for building a stronger union movement and just a stronger workers movement in general. So this is in response to the UPS workers authorizing, a strike, which again, this would be one of the largest strikes since the 1950s, I believe. I mean, this would be a world historic moment in American labor history, something we haven't seen in our lifetimes. I think a lot of people are supporting the UPS workers. They do incredible and tremendously necessary labor in our society. They have a lot of kind of built-in support. But of course, this annoys the monitoring bias. This is like Sam Harris level, thought experiment, little freaks. But I wanted to respond to this a little bit and talk about it a little bit more broadly with you, Matt. They said, according to the UPS website, the average hourly wage for full-time package delivery drivers after 4 years on the job is $42 an hour, about $87,000 a year. This is more than the median pay for architects and tenure-track college faculty, about the same as median engineer pay. And let's just say two things on that. One, good.
Sorry, just to say real quick, it's better pay than a few proletizing I forgot how to pronounce that, but
proletarianizing
positions. Yeah.
No, I mean, so I'm going to do this in 1 minute because I think that you lose when you start accepting this framework. One of the things that they're fighting for, dealing with is two-tier contracts. That yes, for some people who are on a certain track, they can get these higher wage benefits, which is a good thing. But also a lot of people aren't on those tracks, and this is a part of the fight. But I think even accepting that framing in the first place is a losing strategy, because the point should be that all of these workers should be getting paid more for their labor. And there's a few assumptions here. One is that a worker who maybe gets that kind of salary, right? There's just the most general anti labor, particularly blue collar work bias here, right? Right. Somebody who works with their body should not be able to make good money.
Live in any sort of urban area. Like
Yeah.
you have to live in some sort of like cheaper suburbs.
So that's like a reactionary thought, to start with. But the second one is that workers who maybe do receive benefits shouldn't have a union, because unions are only for, people who are like the most hyper exploited in the sense of like having really low pay, right? And like, he says later that, let me find it, or they say later, these guys aren't coal miners or grape pickers. They're on the lower edges of the upper middle class in most non-coastal states. Again, this is a good thing for workers to be getting paid fair wages. They also shouldn't die of heat exhaustion while doing that kind of labor. But this really hits at, I think, a real problem with like solidarity and the way people think about unions in this country, because the two groups that he notes there are tenure track college faculty and architects. Let's start with architects. Architecture is a difficult job, right? And I think that you also make this mistake where, again, you're sort of judging these things by like, a lot of the conversations like, oh, I think UPS workers work harder than architects, or architects work harder than these workers, and like that's a fundamentally like anti-solidaristic basis, right? Like,
Yep.
work is difficult, right? And like people have different, struggles and things that they face. Architects, for example, they work inside, right? But architects overwhelmingly oftentimes have to do things like working overtime without getting paid extra for working overtime. Very regularly, these people are working something close to 80 hours a week. We've seen that from some of the union moves within that industry over the past year. Has been just like the deplorable working conditions for architects, right? And architects have to go through a lot of credentials, right? They do effectively get, when it comes to the schooling, something kind of equivalent to like a PhD, right? You have to go to school and go through training for a long time to be able to work. And a lot of these people aren't getting paid enough for the work that they do. Most of the architecture work is done by the low to mid-level employees, while the person at the top enjoys massive salaries and like the star power, right? They are like, oh, I'm the genius behind this. But literally almost everything on the project was done by a young person. And like you talk to people within that culture of work, there's this kind of like, oh, well, you have to struggle through your first 6-7 years, right? It's hell. And then maybe you can become a star architect, right? One of these people at the top. Why does this exist? It exists because they don't have union protections. Because if it's just you saying, I refuse to work 80 hours a week, that means you either get fired, or maybe you have to work at like a very niche architecture firm that maybe doesn't do that, but only, works in a very small market, a small team kind of thing, right? And that's not even always the answer either. As we know, a lot of times these small businesses are even crueler than the large ones. But why do these union movements often fail with architects is because of exactly the bias that this guy who's saying they're post bias is showing when it comes to unions. Well, I'm not a coal miner. Unions are for coal miners or like the most hyper exploited people in this society. They're not for me, right? I wear a collar, I wear an Oxford shirt to work, and went to a nice university, right? And no. So instead of it being like, oh, well, do you think architects should be paid more than this worker or that worker? No, I think that architects should have a union, and they should be able to get a rate that is fair, and depending on like the market conditions and things that they're facing in that industry. And they certainly don't get that right now. And the union busting firms that have been sort of attacking people in architecture who are trying to unionize use this so well, because there is this kind of like, it's almost like an imposter syndrome thing where people are like, oh, unions aren't for me, or I'm doing something retro, I'm doing something that's not for me. And it's extremely effective, and you see it across the board. In not just that, but you see it sometimes on the universities, and in a lot of these kind of jobs that are becoming more and more proletarianized, as you were saying, Matt. And it's very effective.
Yeah, the whole thing about like miners' conditions, because it's funny, like you hear that mentioned a lot. I doing research for the recent graphics card thing, watching PC guys talk about like, we're not coal miners or whatever, or like Reddit people, but the thing is like Marx and like Engels or whatever, they didn't describe conditions in the coal mine to be like, this is what makes capitalism so bad. Like that is a byproduct of capitalism, which is like the imperatives of the capitalist, which exist regardless of whether you are in a mine or in like a air conditioned studio or whatever, right? Like and yeah, like that sort of thinking, it's liberal.
And like this is used effectively well on both sides of the spectrum, right? So you have that with like maybe these more credentialed workers. But another group of people where this has been very effective, this kind of propaganda has been extremely effective, has been like EMTs and paramedics. Very classic thing where EMTs, like you would see this all the time. They would whip up EMTs and paramedics to sort of attack, for example, $15 an hour for fast food workers, saying like, "Oh, my work is so difficult and important, and we're saving people's lives, and I don't even get $15 an hour. So why should somebody who works at McDonald's, get that?" And it's a very effective way at like destroying solidarity, because instead of saying like, "Yeah, I save a bunch of people's lives, maybe I should be paid higher than the bare minimum or minimum wage, the legal minimum." That people are allowed to pay you for this kind of work. Yeah, maybe we should demand more for our labor and sort of organize around that. No, we're just going to try to make sure that other people don't get that. And it's a very effective anti-union strategy, and it's sort of cooked into American labor. And it's like you can get it. Like we live in a highly atomized and individualized country. People don't have that kind of solidarity. Most people don't think of themselves as workers first. They think of themselves as this whole other host of ideologies or identities. So yeah, what it ends up feeling to them is like, oh well, I'm being devalued by other people. Getting higher wages. Well, it's like the people devaluing is not those other workers trying to get a fair wage. It's your boss, and it's these nasty companies sitting on top of you. But it's very classic stuff there.
Right, everybody is being shortchanged. Like shit, like housing and education and healthcare, like that stuff being commodified is a threat to people up and down the income levels, and that is, you're being shortchanged by that. But like, yeah, the idea that it's somebody else getting too much, and like this country's so allergic to empowering people as workers. Like even the NBA players, because you see a lot of this too. Like, well, NBA players a different class. Well, there's a funny thing about that. Like now we're seeing in this new like collective bargaining agreement that NBA players are going to be allowed to invest in NBA related companies and WNBA related products. And it's like, okay, so they don't just get part of the fucking business that they've been building as workers. They get to take the money that they were given as a wage from the capitalist and reinvest and come back as an investor. And it's like, we're doing, and it's like the same with the college athletes. Like, okay, we'll figure out, we're not just going to give you a part of this. You can go sell yourself to a capitalist though now and sell his product for him. It's like fundamentally, like when you see workers coming together saying, actually, no, these are the conditions that we need to do our fucking jobs. There should not be any more discussion.
Yeah. I think so. So, incredible news for the Teamsters. I think that, the second point there is just sort of looking into that ideology that I think is, it's really effectively run. I mean, there's also some freaks on the left who I don't think we need to get into, who like have gone into this fixation of like productive versus unproductive workers. Talk about the MAGA communist morons. But again, like these things, can be very are oftentimes wielded in ways to to destroy solidarity or opportunities for yourself and for others. And I think that like having some confidence to being able to respond to that is important, but also don't fall for their framing when they say, oh, well, this worker makes so much, therefore maybe we don't think that they deserve a union, or that there's something wrong with them going on strike. Because it's ludicrous. But before we go, Matt, I think you wanted to take us up north for a little bit.
Yeah, so have you had a good weekend, David?
I think I've had a good weekend. Thanks for asking, brother.
I had a friend in town, had some good time, but I don't think either of our weekends has been as packed as Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. So a couple days ago, Attorney General Merrick Garland was in town to announce the conclusion of a report about the cops post George Floyd in Minneapolis and basically say, you're under consent decree now. We'll talk to maybe some activists or some folks in Minneapolis, or maybe police folks, talk about like what you can expect from a consent decree. There's a headline from the Seattle consent decree that killings went up by cops under that period. So like, I think going to need a little bit more. But so Merrick Garland announcing this. Let's just hear a little bit, and we can see Jacob Frey in the background of this clip here.
Years before he killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin used excessive force on other occasions in which multiple MPD officers stood by and did not stop him. Second, we found that MPD unlawfully discriminates against Black and Native American people in its enforcement activities, including the use of force following stops. Based on our review of the data, MPD officers stop, search, and then use force against people who are Black and Native American at disproportionate rates. The data showed, for example, that MPD stopped Black and Native American people nearly 6 times more often than white people in situations that did not result in arrest or citation, given their shares of the population. We found several incidents in which MPD officers were not held accountable for racist conduct until there was a public outcry. For example, after MPD officers stopped a car carrying 4 Somali American teens, one officer told the teens, quote, "Do you remember what happened in Black Hawk Down when we killed a bunch of your folk? I'm proud of that. We didn't finish the job over there. If we had, you guys wouldn't be over here right now."
So
that's so evil. Holy shit.
yeah, it's interesting. I'll just note, actually, now that sort of that's brought up, the response from the Minneapolis Police Department, which is to say, new statement from the Minneapolis Police Department. Report condemns the entire agency based on anecdotes without context, points to number of encounters handled correctly. Union says it would be hard to imagine any blah, blah, blah. There's been exponentially more instances of heroic and selfless blah, blah, blah. Says it can use the report to move toward more trust and respect by the community towards its officers, its officers and officers toward the public they serve. So first thing, the public needs to respect us a little bit more, and then we will maybe respect y'all.
Well, also, like,
go ahead.
The Black Hawk Down quote is just taken out of context. I would love to know the context.
Right, that's fine.
Like, okay.
Exactly. Yeah, look.
You know what I mean? It's like...
There's nuance what happened in Mogadishu that I was referencing. Yeah. Says the union has supported many of the changes. Okay, yeah, but the effective officer recruiting, and also made something that like poverty is the main factor of likelihood of police interactions, not race. So the not racist thing. Now, look, I'm somebody who likes to emphasize class, but I do think like a few things need to be understood about Minneapolis. And this is actually true of a lot of like Milwaukee, Midwestern cities with regards to their Black communities. Mm-hmm. In Minneapolis, and this is in this report, the average median white family is doing better than the average median white family out in the rest of the United States. In Minneapolis, the average median Black family is doing worse than the average median Black family in the rest of the United States. 3/4 of white residents in Minneapolis are homeowners. 1/4 of Black residents in Minneapolis are homeowners. So like there's kind of a distinction without a difference. And like I appreciate this sort of like class focus of the cops, but fundamentally I think maybe y'all need to maybe like and so like what, and also that cop, that sort of reference to Black Hawk Down, I've seen this shit all the time. Especially living in Minneapolis, you'd see this in the comments on any news story regarding the Somali community. People calling it mini Somalia, all these sorts of like just the worst type of racism. And Minnesota is noticeable. There was a study like 8 years or so ago of having cops that aren't from the city. These are cops that are basically suburban Minneapolis, lily white suburbs, and then they come in and are afraid of the communities that they are patrolling. So much as a famous one, Justine Damond, Australian woman, who was called in because she heard a woman screaming. Two cops rolling into the neighborhood, the SUV lights down, get scared when someone runs up to this SUV, shoot her through the window. Oh, it turns out that was the woman who called them. And because they're just afraid, right? Like, and so this is what we're actually paying for. And yeah, like, you know, there's a few other things. Like, I mean, the other broad thing is like the warmth of other suns. I think Isabella Wilkerson book that, you know, and I read 10 years ago about the black migration from the South up north as like and I'm sure this is probably too reductive of the book. I'm sure it got into the struggles black folks faced once they got to Chicago or Detroit. But to me, at that era of my life, it was like, oh yeah, they left all that crap in the South. And it's like, what did they come to? They come to be exploited for rent and to be occupied by cops. Now, I say Jacob Frey has had a big. Well, let me just play a little bit more of this. This thing, because I got some sections from it here. I think are worth playing.
We reviewed all of the 19 police shootings that occurred from January 1st, 2016 to August 16th, 2022. Although this number is relatively small, a significant portion of them were unconstitutional uses of deadly force. At times, officers shot at people without first determining whether there was an immediate threat of harm to the officers or others. Federal law requires officers to warn when feasible that they are about to use deadly force, 15, but MPD officers routinely fail to provide such warnings. MPD officers also use force against people who are a threat only to themselves. Despite these unreasonable uses of deadly force, and to respond with effective, systemic reforms designed to prevent unlawful shootings. We reviewed incidents in which MPD officers fired guns without regard to people in their line of fire. In one example, an off-duty officer fired his gun at a car containing 6 people within 3 seconds of getting out of his squad car. The off-duty officer had responded to a "shots fired" call. Meanwhile, other officers had already responded and instructed a car full of passengers to leave the area by reversing down a one-way street. The off-duty officer turned onto the same street, and the car backed into his squad car. The officer got out of his squad car and, almost immediately, fired a round at the vehicle that hit near the left rear window. Body-worn camera video shows the officer asking the driver one question. "You didn't see me coming here with my lights and stuff?" Our review revealed several instances where MPD officers applied pressure to the necks of youth who did not pose a threat. For example, an officer and his partner responded to a call from a mother who wanted them to remove her teenage children from the home, and claimed they had assaulted her. The officers confronted a black 14-year-old, who was lying on a bedroom floor playing with his phone. The officers moved to arrest the teen, but he pulled away. One officer, Derek Chauvin, struck the teen in the head with a flashlight multiple times and pinned him to the wall by his throat. He then knelt on the teen's back or neck. The mother pleaded, "Please do not kill my son. He's only 14. You've already got him in the handcuffs. Please take your knee off my son." Mr. Chauvin kept his knee on the teen's neck or back for over 15 minutes.
Lord.
So that's just Chauvin. I mean, there's another instance where they talk about a kid stole a $5 burrito from a gas station, and the cop, plainclothes cop, pulled his gun on him, and there's actually way more calls about a wacko with a gun holding a kid at gunpoint than yes, a burrito got stolen. And there's one thing that, like, we're hearing a lot from, like, you know, steps being taken. Jacob Frey was in the background of that, saying, like, we appreciate this, but also, like, we're doing a lot of important work. Nothing's getting done. I mean, there's community like stuff that's going on, but that I don't think Frey has buy-in on. But I think one relevant thing, as you hear the thing saying, you know, we're doing our best, is this little data here. After George Floyd's murder, many officers stopped reporting race. Starting in late May 2020, officers suddenly stopped reporting race and gender in a large number of stops, despite Minnesota Police Department policy requiring officers to collect the data. So this is cops saying, oh, that policy that's supposed to be keep an eye on what we're doing here, we're just not going to do it. And there's just a massive drop off, and it's sustained. Like, you see a line of best fit here that looks like it might be arcing back up, but if you actually look at the data points that are put there, like, it's just, we're at a point where percentage of stops with known race, like, cops just aren't doing it. They're deciding to this day, actually, we're done with that. And so, like, I don't know where exactly this leaves us. Like, we didn't need a report here to tell us that cops are abusing kids, but I will say that is in here. And if we hear a lot about folks saying they care about children, and I would say, like, obviously, like, churches and child sex abuse among family members is not something to scoff at. But you talk about a large number of particularly state-backed folks who are coming and putting kids into restraints that everyone knows aren't healthy for them. And also that trauma, that affects you more. Like, we can act like that's not important, but there's a helpful discussion of the psychology of, okay, what happens when a cop points a gun at you and you're 14? And, you know, it's not very great to have a cop point a gun at you when you're probably 35, but it's just developmentally, you can't be doing that. And we are at a widespread level.
I mean, there's like I want to talk more structurally in a second, and like this is something I've been harping on, and maybe it's just like too much of a personal thought, but like, I am sorry, I just don't when it comes to like look, when it comes to your personal safety, right? If you are confronted by a police officer, yes, like the way that people say is like, you know, you just have to comply because their capacity for violence and escalating the situation is just so high that you put yourself at risk, right? But on like a more like universal level, every single bit of your biology and your mentality, if you get restrained by another person, particularly in a situation that is confusing or worrying or escalating, everything in your body is going to tell you to push back or to try to get away or to try to move or try to adjust yourself. And, you know, the fact that, like, again, like, I understand why we like give people these suggestions, right? But I'm just saying, like, that we've accepted this as a society is so dark. Because, if somebody grabs me, I'm going to try to, you know, get myself free, like, without even thinking. You know, about the situation, because here's the difference between cops. Cops allegedly are supposed to go through training to be in high stress, potentially violent situations. We're not. We're just normal human beings walking around the street. If you have somebody being violent to you, like a police officer, you know, there's no real justification in my mind for, you know, for these. I mean, there's none, you know, for this kind of violence. But like, so this is just something that I think is really worrying. That, like, we just can't accept this like idea either, right? Like, I'm saying beyond even the like, oh, they've overstepped, and when they do things like kill somebody or injure somebody, I'm just saying in general, you know, that entire mentality I think is really negative.
It's horrible, and it's like, this is why, like, to the extent we have pathologianism in America, it comes from this. Like, when you see, like, there's another story where a kid was like unsure of what was going on, and a cop's trying to get them out with a taser out of a car, and it's like. And, you know, like, these sorts of things, you know, I know somebody who, like, you know, I don't know, like, what the solution to me is this, I think, fairly clear in some of this regard. Like, one, it's a broader social safety net and decommodification of life's essentials. But in terms of these emergency things, like, these cops, these should not be the people responding to these calls. Like, we need to have emergency sort of folks that are trained to de-escalate. And then there's this other red herring that I appreciate the DOJ for addressing, which is cops saying we need to do all this stuff like pretext stops because we need to solve this gun problem. And then you actually look at the numbers, they're not doing none of that shit. They're not getting guns off the street with this stuff. So it is, in fact, just like, we're just harassing these people at a large scale for no reason.
No, I mean, 100%. Most of these gun searches are just really great opportunities for them to harass people, particularly even legal gun owners. But you know, there's another thing that I wanted to touch on too, Matt, that they I think they noted in the statement that you read. Has been this narrative from the right and the police unions about low, you know, the basic, oh, like, you know, the laws have gotten so woke and so against police that we're having a hard time getting talent.
Yeah.
It is 100% true that there is a shortage in policing in cities like Minneapolis and in cities like Austin, right? But guess what? That's also the case in Tulsa, in localities and counties all across the United States, with all the, with all different, full spectrum of relationships with the police and laws that have been passed regarding the police. Because not only has there been difficulty for a lot of municipalities to hire cops lately, there has been a lot of difficulty for city and local governments to hire public employee workers in general post pandemic. So the cynical way that these guys try to use like this thing that's a part of like a general trend in America, in the American economy right now,
Right.
to sort of say like, oh, well, it's because you said you want to investigate us for murder, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to investigate us for murder, now we can't hire workers, right? No, there is a problem, and I don't have like the solution or what's going on behind all of that right now. But don't ever let them zero in on that when they say, like, well, Austin has this many police recruitment posts that have been left unfilled, or Minneapolis or New York City or Dallas or Tulsa, because it is just like a fundamental like issue in the public sector in general right now. And they use that very effectively because like there is a kind of like basic logic that can make that make sense in your head. It's like, oh yeah, the cops have been so demonized, no one wants to do that job anymore. Maybe that means there's the cops are more stressed and more dangerous or whatever. But look, it's this is the difference between something being associated with something and something just sort of being part of a larger trend across issues.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that brings us back to when we talked to William Shockey about defund in the austerity context, and I do think like that sort of trend is probably the important one to keep people in on, and then to say like, okay, well, that's happening to a certain extent. What replaces it? Because something affirmative does need to replace it. And I can't help but remember when I was in Madrid, I saw all these vans, and I thought they were like grocery delivery vans, something like that. Like just it's called Samir Social, and it's like their social services van, and it's dealing with like houselessness. And look, I don't know that I imagine there are probably a lot of difficulties with that as well, and it's probably not funded and that sort of things. And from the search I did see, like refugees and stuff can really tax that sort of services. But I will just say, seeing something like that sort of ready to go intervene in sort of mental health crises, instead of cops with a fucking, feelings about Black Hawk Down and 12 rounds, like that's just a better place to be in.
No, I feel you there. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild, and like it sometimes like is disappointing to see what's happening in Minneapolis or even in Austin after so much struggle and fight and shifts.
Well, I have some good images out of Minneapolis if you want some good news. So as I said, Mayor Jacob Frey had a busy weekend. He was out on town on Saturday, doing some dance. This is from a Minnesota teen activist posted this on Instagram, and this is actually Mayor Frey. And so he's with
I did everything right and they indicted me.
So look, I don't follow Minneapolis politics super closely, but my understanding is he's with a politician named Latricia Vita, who is also very eager to roll over for cops and not stand up for their desires. So that's I don't know. Have you seen Abbott Elementary?
No, I haven't.
There's a white guy teacher there that like I saw that, and I literally to this day I'm like, is this a spoiler for the upcoming season? Like, 'cause he's constantly like trying to be like woke sort of thing like that. But I'll be honest, Abbott, I'll just say this to leave you guys. It's a network comedy, so it's a little bit broad. It's not like I think you should leave or something like that funny, but. As far as network comedies go, the creator seems to have good politics. There's like good stuff on Black Panthers and the union movement in there. So so I'd recommend that.
Well, I don't know. Maybe Fry and Kamala can get together and
Good
reinvigorate
Lord,
this
man.
country with the drum lines and
Yeah, he's really not well. He can really. I mean,
do you have
that's
any
a.
sense? I
I'm
know you're
sorry.
not like super tuned in, but it's like, is he going to be able to stay in power? Is he up again soon?
That's a good
He
question.
just
I mean,
like
I feel like
he's such like a Macron, like Trudeau kind of
yes,
character to me, from my limited
exactly.
understanding.
So yeah, maybe he's. I don't know. Who knows?
Who knows?
Uh, I would hope not, but I don't know what's going to replace him if he's gone. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah, who? I mean, that's the thing that's always so worrying.
Like, is it Eric Adams where it's just like, yeah, cops are cool? Like, is that better?
Yeah.
That's
Um. Yeah, it's so crazy. Well, I think before we run, I haven't shared this with you, Matt, but there's a quick thing I wanted to show, if that's okay.
of course.
People might remember our coverage of Brownsville, Texas, and particularly what's been going on with Becca Hinojosa, who is an activist there, who they've thrown the book at for
Yeah.
allegedly spray painting, "Get out of here, colonizer" on a city-funded mural of Elon Musk. Just showing how dark things are getting and how um, I don't think we're going to get a perp walk and photos for this most recent example of vandalism in the city. But
Mm,
the LGBTQ task force in Brownsville painted a rainbow, flag on the crosswalk in Brownsville.
right.
And then just a couple days later, somebody had come over it and painted white over the flag in the road there.
Wow.
And I just have, maybe I'll be wrong, but I sort of doubt that we're going to see
You know, like the mayor's going to take to his
mugshot and
Facebook.
somebody pulled out of their house at 4 in the morning, like they did to Becca, for whoever's behind that.
God, God, man. Yeah, I mean that stuff. Like, that's why I'm more and more allergic to like the rolling the eyes at the sort of co-optation of pride. Like Russell Brand had a video like Raytheon at Pride. What is it? It's like, yeah, man, they fucking do that shit. And there's actually like an active contingent of gay people who are telling them to go pound sand all the time and like
Have always
support
been.
those people. Exactly. And like, but like in communities like that, like how you fucking sleep worse when something like that happens.
No, 100%. And like, at a moment, I just think at a moment like this, doing the gay liberation flag on a U.S. bomber plane joke is like, not saying that that's never valid or an important point to make about how they try to use it's called pink washing, right?
Of course.
Pink washing to like cover up the abuse that these groups do. But if you're still like singularly like hyper focused on that and not the just public attack on the queer community right now, I think you might need to do a little bit of introspection, because sorry, it's just like this is the problem with the left too, is like you learn one thing and you just do it forever instead of reacting to the world around you,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And like, socialism, Marxism, whatever, like these aren't static philosophies, right? These are material ones that like are interacting with what's going on around you, and like it's a bad tendency.
Yeah, we're not
to, like,
studying for a final exam here.
just like, yeah, fuck Raytheon.
Yeah.
But also, like, I think the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation in DC, marched in the Pride Parade there, and some
Mhm.
weirdos were getting worked up about them for doing that, because 10 floats later, the Raytheon people came by as if there was an
Right.
association. It's like, no, I think that it's good for communists to be marching in the street, for pride, and taking ownership of that. And like, yeah, maybe we can point out the hypocrisy and the stupidity of Raytheon, but this idea
Yeah.
now that like being outwardly supportive of like our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, is tacit support for the war machine. I think they're, like, the line has been blurred from like a legitimate critique of like pink washing into something that I don't even know what it is.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
social. It's antisocial nastiness. Um, well, folks, we got a big week on Left Reckoning. I think we're going to be doing an in-depth conversation on this new law that passed here that is really devastating, signed by Abbott, HB 2127, which, there's a lot of different ways to frame it, but and we'll spend some time explaining to everybody. But basically, it puts a lot of the workers' rights that we have won for workers in big cities in Texas under threat. Though I'm sure there'll be a legal challenge, so I don't want to I don't want to talk before that fight's over. But there's going to have to be a reorientation, and I think particularly within labor, starting to think about ways to flex the muscles of workers in the major cities, because Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, those are economic engines for this state. And the GOP has waged war on those workers, are now basically denying them the political opportunity to enact things via the ballot box. But don't forget, like water breaks, things like that, those can be won in a contract as well. So don't for once think that like the fight's over just because of this kind of legal challenge. But anyways, we'll be talking about that a little bit more in depth, and maybe some ways to reorient our struggles in general within the labor movement in a moment where politics seems very foreclosed, the ability to win the majorities we might need to overturn some of these things. So look forward to that. I think we'll have a weed update as well.
Yep. Brian Box Brown going to be back as well for a little update. So he's got a new He-Man anti-capital. Let's see. I have a book about He-Man toys coming out that is inherently anti-capitalist. So that's what we'll also be talking about.
And thank you so much, patrons, for supporting the show. If you want to do a little bit more to help out, it does help us out a lot. If you can get our stuff out there on social media, please share and let your friends know, because hoping to enter into a new growth movement for Left Reckoning. But everyone enjoy the rest of the weekend. We'll be back on Tuesday, and see you soon.
Peace.